Solomon's Table, and she will be interviewed by Glenn Roberts, who is the founder and the founder of Anson Mills Grain Company. So but before I turn it over to them, I just want to welcome you all, tell you that anybody who's interested in food is being sold over there. And the books, all books from the book festival, including ones from this tent, are available for purchase in the book tent. And all authors will be going over there for about 30 minutes after their respective sessions. In addition, although this is all free, the book festival welcomes contributions. It costs a lot to make this all happen, and in addition to it taking a village to make it happen. So any donations can be made over there and would be deeply appreciated. So now let me turn the session over to Glenn Roberts.
Good day. Let me start. Is everyone hear this okay? Welcome. Let me start by saying that when I thought about doing an interview with Joan, I definitely thought about the scope of humankind and how far this title reaches into antiquity, and the absolute amazing amount of wonderful food concepts that are misunderstood worldwide. It's I fell into food history because of attribution. I find that we tend to craze these things up, and it's interesting that all of my studies have focused on food history through our foundation, the Carolina Gold Rice Foundation, where we work worldwide. Keyed on misconceptions of who did what. It's absolutely stunning when you reach into history to find out how much the idea of the wandering cultures, specifically Jewish culture, has played in the development of Western foods. And if you reach back to antiquity, it keeps popping up everywhere. So the basis today is first off to honor Joan, and the second would be to try to give Joan enough lead to be able to just speak freely about her philosophies. This is a stunning work, in my opinion. One of the most beautiful things about it is the fact that we rarely see fact check on this level. This is actually a peer review level scholarship book, which means it could stand up in a historic setting on scholarship and be reviewed worldwide. I think it'll be a text about our culture 100 years from now. It's very important and very cool. All right, so welcome. We're going to jet now. We don't have a ton of time. And don't forget, think of questions. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. So start thinking about questions now. And don't forget the book signing is going to be right after this, over in the book tent. Okay? So don't sit on Joan's book. I brought 2 copies because I wasn't sure whether Joan would have her own. So we want to make sure we do this right. I also didn't know I'd be holding a mic, so this may or may not work. But we're going to try.
Okay.
Thank you, Glenn. Hi. Glenn, by the way, is one of the most interesting, influential people in the food world. And right here on Martha's Vineyard, if you go to a field off I forget, Scotchman.
It's on States Road, right across from the Polly Hill Arboretum.
He's helped
where that is?
Grow the Red Fife rye. And for those of you who haven't used it, go to Mermaid Farm and buy it. It's just fabulous. And actually, I mentioned it in the book. There's a wonderful rye bread recipe, and I only use the rye from the rye flour. But he knows a lot, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, start.
And apropos of King Solomon's Table, we could start with the foundation definition, because on top of the rye that Joan's mentioning, last week, Dan Stern and Caitlin and Alan Healy, who own Mermaid Farm. Dan Stern is a local construction guy, but he's a Renaissance guy too. They harvested the first emmer in 100 and some years on the island right down the road here. And emmer means, in Hebrew,
I forget.
Mother.
Mother, the mother of wheat.
It is the mother of all wheat.
Ima.
There you go. And so that's a good way to kick this off, because it's right here on the island. Just those of us that live here can kind of breathe a sigh of relief, because this is the future of biosecurity on the island too. There used to be 14 mills on this island, and I can guarantee you behind all of that and the provisioning of the whaling fleet that brought those mills here, that there were Jewish merchants that actually kicked that off. And Joan yesterday mentioned something which also bears repeating today about the stock exchange, et cetera, et cetera. Would you like to hold forth on that real quickly?
Well, the stock exchange in Amsterdam in the 17th century, the whole idea of futures was based on the grain industry, and Jewish merchants would buy grain when it was harvested, hold it in silos, and then sell it when people needed it, so they could sell it for more money. And that's how the concept of futures started. And but it's fascinating, because grain merchants, it's the same story all over the world. The Jewish people were in the grain business, and other merchants for food. So, but you want to go back to King's? All right, go on.
So the idea that that we didn't have a lot of diversity in our daily bread until the Sephardi arrived. The first great mill in New York, Tettleton Grist Mill, was a Sephardic mill, and the rabbinical koshering of the stones was an 8-day exercise around the clock prior to first wheat harvest every year until about 10 years ago, when they shut it down completely. So the last rabbinical harvest at a Revolutionary War mill in the United States was in New York, just so you heard it. So, having said that, I'm going to just do pictures. I'm a book fiend, but this is shakshuka. And Joan, where does this come from?
Okay, shakshuka. Well, first of all, let me just quickly talk about King Solomon, why the book is called King Solomon's Table. When I was starting this book, I was visiting India, and I went to a synagogue, and it said that Jews had been there since the time of King Solomon. And I thought, oh, whoa. So I started on this journey learning about ancient foods, and I met with all these archaeologists, and they all said to me to go to one book, which was by somebody named Jean Bottero. And any of you that are interested in food history should go to that book. And it talked about the ancient foods, and what was interesting, it was a book on 4 cuneiform tablets from 1750 BC, written in Akkadian, and the 44 recipes were for the gods. This was before there was monotheism. And when I looked at this book, I thought, wait a minute, these recipes are for huge stews. And there was one actually for a borscht, because they did have beets in Babylonia. But was interesting to me with what were the ingredients that they used, because I figured this was 1750 BC. Abraham was about 1400 BC, and King Solomon was about 1000 BC. Therefore, these ingredients would have been around for them, and they were much, 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 much earlier. But Glenn has just skipped to shakshuka, which is, of course, an Arabic and a Hebrew word. I forget exactly what it means, but I'm sure you have it. I have it right here. But anyway, it had tomatoes in it. Tomatoes came from the old world, from the new world to the old world. They landed in the port of Naples, which was a Spanish port after the Columbus Exchange. There were lots of tomatoes. North Africa was a place that a lot of Italian food was harvested. So it was the natural place with Sicily and also the south of Italy, but North Africa, to harvest these tomatoes. When they had a huge amount of tomatoes, they had to cook them. They didn't have what we have, like refrigerators or freezers. You'd either can them or you'd cook them. And what they said, so that in North Africa, you couldn't say Libya or Morocco. I mean, everyone has their theories on it. It was all over North Africa, but particularly Libya. And in Libya, they use the shakshuka with, we use it today for breakfast. I know in Boston, Tate has it, two different kinds for breakfast. And it's very, very popular and I think that the person who's really made it popular, of course, was Yotamato Lengi. My recipe comes from Virginia, believe it or not, an Israeli who came to Virginia and makes it with smoked paprika and eggplant. It's very delicious, and lots of tomatoes. But the point is, it was all over the Maghreb, and it was a dish that you made in Libya when a woman was with her lover rather than her husband and didn't have enough time to make a proper dinner for the family. So that's what it was. And but the interesting thing is, there was a man named Dr. Joan Sequeira, who was a Portuguese Jewish doctor. For some reason, he came to Williamsburg at the time of when Williamsburg, before the revolution, was a very important city. And he introduced Thomas Jefferson to the tomato in the sense that it was edible. Before then, everybody thought of it, because it was a member of the nightshade family, as an inedible plant. And there's this story, and I know it is, I've heard it from different cities, but I read about it in the annals of Petersburg, Virginia, where Thomas Jefferson came to the court and he took a tomato and he bit it, and everyone went, oh, they thought he would die, and he didn't die. So people started eating tomatoes and planting tomatoes. But Dr. Joan Sequeira was in Williamsburg, and he was never married. He's one of my favorite characters in history. So I connected him in my book with shakshuka, because I found it in a restaurant with this Israeli chef. You know, what's an Israeli chef doing in Virginia, making shakshuka? But then Dr. Joan Sequeira is the one who brought it to the colonies.
That's amazing, and in keeping with the the love aspect of the Arabic word shakshuka, Joan Nathan writes, not me, that it means all mixed up.
Oh, right, exactly.
And hopefully not found out.
I'm all mixed up, but go on.
Yeah? Okay. And to speak about the dynamics of how these work, all the concepts in this book have this expanding range of authenticity that goes from a point that Joan is personally experienced and interested in to antiquity and then forward. And so one thing to mention later in the book, in fact, almost 200 pages later, pomodori a mezzo. Joan, do you remember that recipe amongst the hundreds in here?
Actually, and that brings it back to the vineyard again. I know a lot of you probably know the Modiglianis here. And I interviewed, what was her name? Suzanne Modigliani's mother-in-law. And she told me about another dish, an eggplant dish, which we'll get to later. But she also introduced me to her husband's cousin who lived in Rome, and she was one of the best and the oldest families that cooked in Rome. So I went to visit her, and it was quite extraordinary. The whole story's in the book. It was the day of the 70th anniversary of the day that the Germans came in and took the Jews away. And her husband's father was one of those Jews. And her husband was the president of the Jewish community. She didn't tell me any of this. I walked to her house. These are long answers, I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay, you can read the rest in the book. I walked to her house, and she greeted me literally at the door with a knife, what do you call it, beak knife. It's an artichoke cutting knife to make carciofi alla Judea, and an old 19th century cookbook with this recipe in it, in Italian, of the food of the Jews of Italy. And we went upstairs for an entire day of cooking in her kitchen. And it was really extraordinary, because we cooked, then we went up to the rooftop, And she made pasta with, as the Italians do, a simple pasta with zucchini. And we sat looking at St. Peter's on one side and the I was going to say the Cathedral of the Jews, but anyway, the synagogue of the Jews on the other side. And she lived right on the border of the ghetto in the home of it was an ancient home of a woman that was a noble woman who, I guess they killed her because she wasn't good to her husband or something. But anyway, it was quite a day, and we made these. One of the dishes I liked best were these tiny tomatoes. It's really easy to do. You just bake them for a long time in olive oil. Just put them in a high heat, and then you eat them like candy. And it's a perfect recipe for this time of year. But again, these are early recipes because it's already written in the 19th century that this is something that you should eat. And they did the same thing with zucchini.
Okay. Wow, it's amazing. The next idea starts with everyone's grocery store shelf hummus and goes all the way back to the dawn of civilization. So in this particular case...
right? Hummus. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me.
Okay.
Yes, I need constant pronunciation lessons on this. Where do we find interest in the realities of what chickpea means for the future and since antiquity, and why is it there? I'm a farmer. It's drought tolerant, salt tolerant, disease tolerant. It fixes nitrogen, which makes crops green, and it is disease resistant completely. So it is a perfect plant. When you get water, drought, and salt tolerance, since I'm a rice guy, you can intercrop it with rice. And you see these polycrops, as they're called, crop up in antiquity all the way to the Industrial Revolution. Then we go monocrop and it stops. So Joan, tell us about chickpeas and why.
Well, first of all, chickpeas, in this, remember I was telling you about this book from 1750 BC? Chickpeas are in there. But hummus isn't. Why wasn't hummus in there? Because it was the food of the everyday people. Everyone ate hummus. Hummus was a gruel. It was sustenance. It's in the Bible. It was a gruel that you would dip bread in, just as it is today. I mean, that's how far back. They didn't have lemons then because lemons hadn't come yet from China, but they did have chickpeas. I've never seen a recipe for it then. There weren't many recipes, but I believe absolutely that it was there. And I know that we found chickpeas 8,000 years ago, or 12,000 years ago, excuse me. They found one through DNA testing in Jordan. So we know it's, first of all, of the region. Everybody used it. And also, it was way before then, I know, because in the myths of Gilgamesh, they mention chickpeas. And so that, again, it's the food of the past, and it will be the food of the future. And my recipe, which I think is really good, what I do is I add preserved lemon to my hummus, and it's just delicious.
And it's a different food than you can buy already prepared. Make sure that that's really clear. That's the truth. Okay, next. Eggplant. Isn't this easy? Isn't this gorgeous? Right? Okay, Joan.
What?
All yours.
Okay. All right. Eggplant is another food that the Jews brought with them it came from China. Again, there were a lot of Jews that were doctors. That's why they knew the properties of food. And in China, they were eating it. And of course, I'm not just saying the Jews were the only ones, but that were doctors or that were merchants that were carrying these foods around. But they created lots of recipes that we know today. And again, going back to the Modiglianis, they had a recipe called eggplant bits, which were eggplant sautéed with a little bit of scallions and maybe just salt. This was a recipe that was all over the world. And Jews ate it, other people, you knew it was Jewish because you didn't peel the eggplant. So you'd have this black out on the outside. It got embellished in Sicily with tomatoes later after the Columbus exchange, with capers, the capers of Sicily, pine nuts, the pine nuts of Sicily. So it's a really good recipe in Sicily. That's what the recipe is. But it's also called caponata Judea. So it's a Jewish dish. I think that ratatouille is sort of another embellished dish from it. It's like you can see one thing leads to another until it becomes part of our culture. And of course, today, nobody knows what the origins were. They just know that because of the internet and because of cookbooks, everybody is using every single recipe.
I love this. What am I, chopped liver? It's on page 78 of Joan's book, and I'd hold it up, but there is not a picture, so I'm representing the picture. So I am chopped liver. I picked this out of hundreds of ideas in this book, mainly because that one statement pretty much says it all. Joan, how does the history of this weigh in here for Ashkenaz?
You know, what you have to understand is Jewish food really started, as far as I'm concerned, in Babylonia. And then because with the destruction of the first temple, Jews went back to Babylonia. A lot of them had come. Don't forget, Abraham came from Babylonia. And then it spread. And it spread with the Jews and with the Arabs because it was food of the land. And but people, by the time the Jews got to France and to Italy after the destruction of the Second Temple, you were using olive oil for the bitter herbs maror. You were using romaine lettuce. There were a lot of things that were already established as not just Jewish, but Mediterranean. When Jews went farther north, they went to Ashkenaz, which was a plain between southern Germany and northern France. And when they went there was no longer any olive oil, so they had to have chicken fat. There was nothing green growing at Passover, so they had horseradish. The horseradish center of the world is around Strasbourg. And so you see how things changed, so that the chickens, which originally, chickens came late to Judaism, by the way, because you didn't eat chickens. You used you had chickens for the eggs. After about 2 years, when they no longer laid eggs, then you would slaughter them. Or the male chickens were for cockfighting. And again, when they were older, that's why coq au vin is an old chicken, and you would cook it for a long, long time. But I forget where I'm going. Okay, so. But the thing is that when they went to France and to Germany, they learned about dishes like kugel, which is a German word. A lot of German words became what we think of as Jewish food, like chopped liver. And the thing is that chopped liver was used because you needed the goose fat or the chicken fat for cooking. And you used to see all the rabbis were against the Jews using the foie gras because they thought it was really cruel, that it was cruel. And so they wrote all these treaties against, and they were brave, these rabbis, because a lot of the Hungarian merchants really wanted to sell foie gras because you got a lot of money for it. So most of them, if they were selling it, did not eat it themselves. They would just have regular chopped liver. But that became a delicacy in France.
I think that the idea that animal welfare was on the front page, driven by Jewish culture that far back, is pretty amazing. Does everyone here understand the pushback against classic foie gras techniques in the Hudson Valley? They actually outlawed it. Force feeding to get big fat livers.
Well, they also outlawed it in Israel.
There you go. So guess where it started? Another one of those attribution things that, frankly, until I read Joan's book, it never even dawned on me that kosher and Jewish culture might have something to do with animal welfare. But where I go, I deal with lots of farmers, and they always say that the guys that are koshering animals can read the animal from the abattoir backwards, and they're looking for animal welfare as integral as part of the kosher laws. The other thing that I think is interesting that goes straight here, since we do have a touch of politics, and I'll just mention it and we'll go on, but in Joan's book, we're not talking about slavery. It's the big gorilla that doesn't ever make it onto the pages in real stark terms, but it is interesting that there are Quaker Jews of great note in history that don't get held up, especially in Philadelphia, and I am thinking probably on Nantucket as well. Nantucket is the first place that slavery was abolished in the United States in 1703. Does everyone here know that? So, yeah, gotcha. So in the overall scheme of things, you see these attribution things slip by. So we're going to wrap it up here to go to Q&A. Are we done, or we get Q&A? Okay, all right. So I wanted to do one more because this picture's so pretty. Joan mentioned this, right? But there's, in Native American culture, it's called clay pot cookery. And if you boil, you break the pot. And this goes back thousands of years here, pre-Columbian. So can you explain a little bit about this olive oil and or argan oil and poaching?
First of all, clay pot was, they certainly used it in Europe and in the Middle East until the Iron Age, which was about 1000 BC, I think, or later. And then they started using iron pots, but they did use this clay pot cookery, and so things were like simmered. I just got an email from my daughter who's in Uganda, and she just had a Shabbat bread that she said was boiled. Well, I think it was just simmered in a pot because pots break. And anyway.
So it's anyhow, I just think this is lovely, no matter what. The photography in here is
And
killer.
this, again, is from the Modigliani family. It's just a fabulous cartofi alla Judea, which is one of the great dishes of the Jewish culture. And it was from Talmudic times, and they wrote in the Talmud that you could eat an artichoke or a thistle. And you would fry it, because this was really cheap food in those days. And the artichokes were abundant around Rome at one time of year, which was Passover, so you could eat them then. And then of course, all over Rome, people eat them now. But a lot of them are from other places, and you can tell which ones are really the Roman artichokes. And what they do is, like this woman that I interviewed, she makes about 400 when she makes them, and she freezes them for every special occasion throughout the year. So what she does is she fries them once, freezes them, and then fries them again.
And just so we all know what you're missing, we're going to go to Q&A in just a second, but I have a list of groundbreaking ideas that I haven't read anywhere, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Joan's been doing it for a lot longer and is much better at it. But couscous, buckwheat, yucca latkes, things about sardine culture I never even knew. Escoveche, the origin of that. And kedgeree and rishtafel and their resonance with the Fertile Crescent in Israeli culture, Jewish culture. Even things about lox that we're all supposed to know, I didn't know. Even things about chicken, I learned. And then sugar, chocolate, dates, etc., paprika, and it goes on and on. It's just stunning. So, one, get the book, but two, now ask questions. Go for it. Who would like to venture a question for Joan, please? Go.
Okay.
Oh.
What were some of those Babylonian recipes, or did any strike you out of that original
Well, actually, the borscht did, for sure. And what was so interesting is that there was one for, what's it called, an oryx, which is now a cow that is no longer, that fed 1,500 people. So they roasted it. An oryx, that's it. It's extinct. But they were just stews, really, and a lot of different kinds of flatbreads, other kinds of breads. And I realized that they weren't so much for the recipes, but they had these in the Akkadian for the ingredients, so they could buy these ingredients. Because how much can you memorize? You can, and especially, and I, by the way, I found many, many more little shopping lists later when I looked at the Geniza, which is from the 8th to the 13th century, which were basically it's trash found in the Cairo synagogue, and it was in synagogues, churches, and mosques, wherever you use the sacred word of God, and they found this trash in there, and there were like shopping lists for men, and it was always men that went shopping in the Middle East, not women, because women very often lived in compounds basically, and they would tell their husbands what they needed. Like it was like for the 13th century, one chicken for Shabbat, or one or mallow. And different things like that. And it was the same exact ingredients, of course, as I found in the Babylonian cookbook, which was fascinating.
And speaking to Babylonian really quickly, you've got nuanced things in here like reference to what we know today as commodity sugar, as that honey from a reed, quote unquote. And it's amazing. So there's another question here.
I just remember listening to you once recently, and you told a wonderful story about following an ingredient, and it escapes me now, but somehow you wound up in somebody's walk-up apartment or something in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe it was the blueberry.
Quite possibly. It was, you said, the finest food you ever tasted in your life, and it...
Oh, I know.
Someone was...
It was in... I was told that we can't go to Baghdad, right? And that Iraqi food was really the great Jewish food. So somebody told me about a cook in London. So I went to her house, and it's hard to get to people because a lot of people in other countries don't really trust you. And I have to tell you, I just was in Israel, and two people that I wanted to interview heard that I was going to write about it for a cookbook, and they were scared to death, and they canceled on me. Anyway, this woman didn't cancel on me, and she made this wonderful, it's called Tabit, which is a chicken dish, probably the oldest chicken dish that we know today. And actually, when I was making it, some Indians walked into my house. People always come into my house anyway, and some Indian chefs, and they said, "Oh my God, it smells exactly like an Indian food." And of course, it probably was an Indian food, because immigrant food travels. All food travels. So you take a whiff of something, and you're in a home, and there was then the trade routes between India, Iraq, Aden. It's not called Cairo. What's it called? Cairo. But anyway, and even Sri Lanka. The smells and the tastes would all be around. Anyway, so I went to her home and I made this, and then I transformed it a little bit to make it a little bit easier in the States. But we spent a whole day eating these wondrous things that I would never have ever eaten in my life. But the best part of it was the stories that they told. And, we could maybe end it on one of those paragraph stories of this woman. I've got to find it, though. Wait, just hold this for a second.
Sure.
Because she was quite extraordinary. And the stories that I get from these people are what make all of this worthwhile. So I'll let you go back to Tabit. Where is Tabit? Oh my God.
I've got it in my notes.
Wait a minute, chicken. Wait a minute. It's the first chicken recipe. Here, I'll get it from here. But it's okay.
Tabit's on
240, all right.
249. Right?
All right. During a delightful day, I learned recipes and listened to stories about Eileen's early life. Her name was. She's now 87 years old. When some 20 people, mostly family, when family meant everything, lived in a big house overlooking the Tigris River. At home, we used the rice my husband's family grew, Eileen told me in her kitchen. The rice often had small stones in it, so we had to clean it before we washed it. Then we washed it again and again. The rice we get today is clean, but we Iraqis still wash it 3 times and soak it for a few hours. In Baghdad, we only ate fruits and vegetables in season, so we had to make and store what we needed for the whole year. We even made tomato puree for our cooking, she added. added. In the summer, everybody bought a lot of tomatoes, squeezed the juice out, sieved them to remove the seeds and the outer skin, and put the juice in a big container on the roof of the house and kept it there for a few days in the sun until it became thick. Friday was the day to start Tabit. There were no home ovens at that time in Baghdad, so the Tabit was cooked on charcoal overnight for Sabbath lunch. On top of the covers, we put eggs in their shelves, then covered it again, she said. On top of everything was a folded blanket to keep the heat. We ate the eggs Saturday morning with tomatoes, onions, and lemon salad, with pickles or with spring onions and parsley. Today, most cooks have learned speedier ways to make Tabit than the one I described above. When I make it, I follow some traditional customs, like using fresh spices I grind and cleaning the chicken with a lemon. Also, I make sure, well, I can just tell it to you, to produce enough hakaka, known in Iran as tadig, the prized crust of rice that forms on the bottom of the casserole. But the point is, we would never have known that about her life if I hadn't spent the time in her kitchen. You don't get that on interviews on the phone. First of all, they don't trust you. But secondly, it's time. And I urge all of you, if you've got family recipes, get them now. Get that motion of recording things, because it's not just the recipes you'll get. You'll get all those stories. So.
And the last thing to do, Savannah red rice, for those of you who know world culture and have been to Savannah,
Right.
Guess what? It's the Sephardi arrival in 1730 that drives that culture forward and mixes it up.
It's not Sephardi. It's Iraqi, because that was the center. Babylon was the center of the rabbinic center of the Jews. It's about the 8th century. It went to the south of France, and because these Jews ate rice, just as the slaves came to the America with things that they ate, they brought the red Camargue rice, and then they brought it to Savannah and to Charleston. I mean, it's a fascinating, and the reason that we know it, because there are pilavs. There's saffron pilav, which was a Friday night dish, and that has traveled from Iraq to the south of France, where it's eaten today as a French dish, to Charleston, and that whole tadik, the crust, is something that is very Sephardic or Iraqi or whatever you want to call it. So,
Thank you, Joan.
Thank
it's
you.
an honor.
Thank you very much. If this made you hungry, there's food over there. And if you want the book signed, Joan will join you at the book tent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joan. Nice job.